Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Yunus Mirza. I'm the director of the Brzezinski Institute for Global Virtual Learning. We're really excited to have all of you here and to speak about the special collaboration between Sammie Buzzard and Staci Strobl. We're especially excited because we started off as a project that focused on in-person exchange, primarily between the US and Southeast Asia and the Balkans. So since then, we've expanded. Recently, we signed an MOU with Yarmouk University in Jordan. And now we're super excited with this relationship with the United Kingdom through Sammie and the US-UK Fulbright Commission. I want to now turn it over to our Associate Provost, Amy Sarch, who has been a key supporter and formulator of this project and our COIL Virtual Exchange Initiative. She's working behind the scenes to support it and make sure it succeeds across campus. And she'll say a couple of words about how this particular award fits within our larger strategic mission and vision. So please, Amy, start.
Thank you. This is really exciting for us at Shenandoah. We pride ourselves on developing global citizens, and it really was before the pandemic. We were thinking of global citizenship basically in the physical presence. So we've sent students abroad. We have lots of different opportunities for our students to go to abroad. And the pandemic actually had us pivot, all of us around the world. And Eunice had the foresight to actually pivot what the Brzezinski Institute was actually doing. And because of that pivot, we developed COIL, and we developed a very robust in-house program where we are training our own faculty, and we have the ability to train faculty from all over. And our goal is to integrate it across the curriculum. So our next goal is to actually integrate it into the general education program. So this really helps us at Shenandoah even get closer to what we are hoping is that every student has a global experience. So we know that students can't necessarily travel for various different reasons, but they could do this international exchange in the classroom when it's developed really, really well with incredible creative faculty members. So COIL has actually given us the ability to reimagine what it means to be a global citizen. And for our students who maybe could never get to go abroad, this gives them a window into that. And for some, if they do get to actually physically go abroad, it kind of whets their appetite for wanting more. So it opens our students' minds, it opens our minds, and it's been a really wonderful way to just further that global citizenship mission. So I'm so grateful for Eunice's leadership, for his entire team, some of which are on this call and in this room, and for the faculty that are taking that leap, because you teach your class and you're excited with the way you teach your class, but to actually teach a class that integrates COIL means to rethink in a lot of innovative, creative ways, and it takes a lot of work. So I thank Staci so much for the work that she has done at Shenandoah, and I thank you, Sammie, for being part of this work, and thanks to Fulbright for the award, and ACE for all the support you've been giving us. And we're just really excited to see how this will grow. So thanks to all of you, and I cannot wait to hear more about this project from Staci and Sammie. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Amy, for your comments. And Amy was one of the key supporters of us starting our own COIL workshop here at Shenandoah University. And Staci is actually a graduate of that. And then after she graduated, she actually applied for this award, and we're very fortunate that she got it. So let's go ahead and move along to speak with Maria Balenska, and she is the Executive Director of the US-UK Fulbright Commission. And I want to begin by thanking you, Maria, for this award for Staci and to Shenandoah University. And I also want to thank you for trying COIL Virtual Exchange. I know Fulbright also has this history of in-person exchange, so that I believe this is a pilot, and I really appreciate this innovative and creative effort that you're leading. So with that, Maria, please, would you like to say a couple of words?
Well, Eunice, thank you so much for your introduction. And I can't say how excited I am to see Staci and Sammie sitting side by side. This is and also to meet you, Amy, whom I'm going to meet in person in London later this month, I think. I just want to say a few words to say how central these Global Challenges Teaching Awards and therefore COIL is to our vision of the future at the US-UK Fulbright Commission. Of course, the US-UK Fulbright Commission has for 75 years almost, it's our 75th anniversary next year, been promoting in-person exchange. But we really, are looking to offer the kind of global learning opportunities that we develop to lots of different people, and to those people who also aren't necessarily going to be able to travel. And indeed, in a world where we're dealing with climate change increasingly, and that, of course, is the focus of your joint virtual exchange, to really be thinking creatively and innovatively about how we can bring students and professors together between different countries. So this is really very much at the heart of our sort of strategic priorities at the Commission, which are to widen participation in Fulbright programming across the piece through inclusive excellence, and also how can we, as the one organization that's bringing together US and UK students and scholars and sending them in both directions across the Atlantic, help our Fulbright community to tackle global challenges. So this award, you can see it really does it's bang in the center of that, promoting innovation in teaching on these big important topics, democratizing global learning, and also helping to build what we hope will be sustainable relationships between institutions of higher learning in the US and the UK. It's just, this is, and the other little bit of news I want to share with you, because of course, Staci and Sammie are in the pilot cohort of our Global Challenges Teaching Awards with two other pairs of professors, but we are 2/3 of the way through fundraising for the second year, and thanks to the State Department and the Carnegie Corporation, which just gave us a grant just last month. And the other bit of exciting news is that the Global Challenges Teaching Awards were featured on the stage at the Clinton Global Initiative in New York a couple of weeks ago as something that was, really, they sort of feature commitments from different nonprofits and governments and other institutions looking to tackle big problems in the world. And this they decided to really highlight as an innovative way of furthering positive change. So I'm so glad that Shenandoah and Cardiff, and especially Staci and Sammie, are the pioneers in this for us. At least I know you all have been doing COIL before, but for us at the Fulbright, this is a really exciting opportunity. And I just want to also give a shout out to my colleagues Jessica and Rebecca, who've been doing such amazing work and guiding all of our end of activities, and our fantastic partners in ACE with John and Veronica. So that's it from me. Just happy to be here.
Thanks so much, Maria, for those words. I'm really excited to hear that this program is growing and it's being featured. And I also want to agree 100% with the idea of sustainable partnerships. And that's the key goal of the Brzezinski Institute. Every single MOU we sign, we want that to be a long-term sustainable relationship, not just a one-off of sorts. So let's go ahead and hear a little bit from John Fowler, who's representing the American Council of Education, which has helped facilitate this award. So please, John.
Hey, thank you, Eunice, and thank you all for including us today. I'll send my apologies from my colleague Veronica Honorevole, who directs the American Council on Education's Virtual Exchange COIL Transformation Laboratory, which is the main work that we do at ACE trying to help advance virtual exchange and COIL both all around the U.S. We represent all of the U.S. higher education sector. We're the main entity representing the entire American higher education sector, but also with their partners around the world. COIL cannot be done in isolation. It does require that I in COIL, the international component, in order to move this forward. And as some of you on this call may know, but some may not, the roots of the COIL idea actually go back to a Fulbright that Professor John Rubin had over 20 years ago now. And coming out of that experience led him to create what were the early ideas of what eventually became COIL. So at ACE's been doing this work for about 15 years. I've been doing this work for about 12. So we were very excited to work with Maria and her colleagues at the US-UK Fulbright Commission to finally kind of bring some things full circle and bring COIL a little bit more deeper into the Fulbright community. And we've been doing some further work in that space as well, speaking with some other commissions, and Maria, Veronica and I actually are speaking with the Fulbright Alumni Association on Friday at their annual conference to try to continue to spread these ideas within the Fulbright community. So my role in the ACE COIL Transformation Lab was focusing on the faculty this time. So it's been a great pleasure to have worked with Sammie and Staci, as well as Karen, Andre, and Eunice this year to see them develop their projects. It's been wonderful to see that relationship and partnership continue to grow since we first put them together through a pretty onerous matchmaking application process, that they may recall, which in many ways we kind of put them together on a blind date. We kind of thought they would work well together and then put them together in a Zoom room and said, here we go, let's see what we can do. So they've gracefully worked through some of the early challenges in getting that partnership going to create their COIL project. And I think they have a really engaging, exciting plan to bring their students together for this online exchange and collaboration. So I'm truly excited to see them continue to build on this work together this semester. And back to your comment, Eunice, the sustainability, hoping that they'll continue to work together in the future as well. And I personally feel that many of the most exciting and fruitful COIL partnerships actually, and the student experiences that come out of them, are the result of interdisciplinary projects such as the one that Sammie and Staci are putting together here. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing the results of your hard work and the great project that the Shenandoah and Cardiff students create as they collaboratively work on solutions to the truly global challenge of climate change. And as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, collaboration is not an easy process, but it really is only through such collective action that we're going to be able to come together as a global community to address the many challenges that we all face. So I just want to say good luck to all of you as you enter into this next phase, the implementation phase, which is the most exciting phase in a COIL project, but also sometimes the most scary as well. And just to remind you that, Veronica and I are here to help you in any way we can in the implementation phase and coming out of that as well. So good luck to you all. Thanks for including us today.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Don, for those comments. And I want to thank you for organizing that training. We actually went through a training to support Staci and Sammie and Karen. Lucas, who's sitting on to my left, she also went within that training with my together, and we learned a lot about COIL, and we're implementing best practices here at Shenandoah University. So thanks so much, Maria and John, for your comments, and now we'll move to the main event, right? So we want to hear from Staci and Sammie. So they have prepared a presentation, some bullet points, talking about their collaboration. They'll speak for around half an hour or so, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague Karen, who will facilitate the question and answer session. So.
Okay, well, thanks, Eunice. Well, I should start with actually some thank yous before we introduce ourselves. First of all, to Fulbright and to ACE for funding and supporting this award. We definitely could not have got this far without John and Veronica's help, and also everyone behind the scenes at Fulbright that answer all of our emails around various questions about travel. You've all been amazing, so thank you for that. But most importantly, I need to thank Shenandoah for the wonderful welcome I've had so far. So, Eunice and Karen, you've been on the award track with Staci and myself for a while, so I feel like I already know you. It's lovely to meet you in person, and thank you for everything you've done setting this up. And to your assistant, Robert Such, for being here and everything you've done on your end, and also, probably most importantly, to Leanne and Hilary, who have been doing a ton of work behind the scenes to make this visit happen. And I've got an amazing schedule for this week of things I'm going to be doing, so I'm looking forward to the rest of this visit. I realize we've made a list of bullet points of things we talked about. We haven't actually included introducing ourselves. So I'm already going to go off of the plan and do that, because there it is. I've met several of you here, but there are a lot of new faces as well. So for those I haven't met, I'm Dr. Sammie Buzzard. I'm a lecturer in climate change at Cardiff University in the UK. My background is kind of in the mathematical side of climate science and creating models and simulations of how Antarctica is melting. So a nice positive topic for an early morning. But yeah, so that's kind of where I came at this award from, is from a sort of physical sciences background. And maybe I'll talk about the award a little for a second, as that was our plan, and I'll let you do your introduction and your next point, if that's okay. So yeah, apologies to the Fulbright and ACE folks who know all of this, but for those who haven't been involved in this so far, we thought we'd just describe a little about the Fulbright Award that Staci and I have been lucky enough to be recipients of. So the Global Challenges Teaching Awards, as you just heard, I guess is a pilot. So it's really interesting to hear that actually Fulbright isn't completely new to COIL, and that this is something that came out of Fulbright. So that's a really nice kind of full circle moment here. But the award had 3 themes. So we are the climate change theme, then there was also pandemics and racial justice. And for each of those 3 themes, a pair was selected. So one person on the UK side and one person on the US side. And as John briefly mentioned just now, as we'll go into a little bit more later, we went through a fairly in-depth kind of interview and matching process to be lucky enough to be the recipients of the Climate Change Award. So what that involves is we've both taken an existing class and we have kind of paired them together and worked out ways in which our students can collaborate and learn from each other, but also kind of still keeping a lot of the existing class in there, because as you'll hear throughout our talk today, those are very different classes and very different situations. So there's some challenges trying to work out how to match them up, but also it's a really great opportunity for our students. So those classes will be happening in this semester. Staci's has actually already started. Mine will be starting as of Tuesday morning. I fly back on Monday, so I'm going to have to have a lot of coffee to do with the first lecture for that one. So yeah, we've pretty much finished up the planning process now, and we're looking forward to the implementation of those. And the award itself has also covered this visit, and Staci will be coming to visit me in Cardiff in a couple of weeks' time once we've started the implementation, so that we can work on that a bit more in person. But for our students, the experience is entirely virtual, which is of course wonderful, especially because we're on the climate change theme. While I'm very grateful that we've been able to travel and form a really good relationship, and it's great to be here at Shenandoah, I think it's also amazing for our students that they can get that international experience without having to travel, A, because of the carbon, and B, because not everyone is, of course, able to travel that easily. So yeah, I think that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the award. So I should maybe let Staci speak, and yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes. So I'm Dr. Staci Strobl, professor of criminal justice at Shenandoah University. And so my interest, I'm a comparativist within criminal justice. And so that's sort of how I came to be teaching and researching in the realm of environmental crime, because of its global implications, the transnational nature of problems that have to do with the environment. And so I was very excited to, I've only been at Shenandoah about a year. I was really excited that when I applied, that this was one of the things that my hiring committee was really looking forward to, was in particular this environmental crime course. And then I jumped in on COIL really quickly. So I want to thank all of the COIL folks at Shenandoah for really, I've only been doing this work for about a year. And so I'm a little daunted to even be talking about it, because I feel like in the audience here, we have some real veterans. So, but I think what's really unique about Sammie and I being put together is in my coursework, in our class, and in my research, more focused on the legal ramifications of climate change, and also the social processes and the social dislocations that unfortunately will happen with climate change events that we're going to unfortunately increasingly see. And so the reason I actually applied for the Fulbright COIL had to do with the fact that I was teaching climate change criminology, which is an actual niche thing, over like just a week within my broader course. And I was really focusing on what originally sort of interested me personally more at the time, on toxic crimes and disasters that have to do with industrial processes. And I could tell in the last couple of years teaching this course that students are really interested in climate change because they're worried, because they're seeing it as a great challenge. And I felt like I just wasn't doing enough on that piece. So, I would do a small introduction on the physical processes of what it was, but it was really like a 6th grade rendition of greenhouse gases because I'm not don't have a science background. Within criminology and criminal justice, climate change actually does increasingly become part of what is going on in our field, because from sort of 2 angles. One piece is with any of these, and we saw this with Hurricane Katrina, for example, with any of these major disasters, you're going to end up with so much social dislocation that there may be upticks in crime. And there's been some early research that says, with people being in shelters, going to new places to avoid a disaster, or because their home has been destroyed, and so on, that there is actually an uptick of crime around that. But the other angle that's really important for our students is the growing global sort of NGO movement towards thinking of what has happened with climate change is that being human caused, that actually is in essence, it's an abstract concept, but a crime against humanity. That certain, and again, it's very complicated, but that certain actors, whether we're talking about multinational corporations or governments, have somehow, actually can be held responsible in a way which is complicated for something called ecocide, or death of the planet or death of the environment. And it's controversial, of course, because that's quite a big thing to sort of wrap your head around. And I feel like our criminal justice students can benefit from knowing that. But when I applied, I was really interested. I actually put in my application, I would love somebody with a science background, because I feel like it's so interconnected. And it's hard to understand the kinds of social and legal changes that political changes that we may need to make in this sort of era where climate change disasters are coming at us quicker and quicker. If we don't understand those physical processes, if we don't understand that it's sea level rise and it's warming heat in big cities, it's all of these things. And I really want my students to have that bigger picture. So I was really delighted to be with somebody here who is literally measuring melting glaciers and has a wonderful sort of background in modeling and mathematical modeling of the physical processes. So we're really thinking of this as a physical process and social process melding, and our students are going to come at it from these very different programmatic spaces, and we're hoping that together they can teach each other a bit. And really sort of not just get that cross-cultural relationship, but they're also sort of gaining perspective. Because in whatever careers they go into, almost all careers may have moments, regardless of what it is, where they have to respond to some sort of climate change issue, and to sort of understand beyond your discipline what options are. In criminal justice, we sort of are learning about a hammer, which is, you're responsible, and so we need to prosecute you. That probably isn't going to be what saves the day when we're talking about climate change, but certainly local police, federal disaster experts, or national disaster experts, UN, they're going to be responders who kind of only know the hammer. And so to sort of give tools to folks beyond that, particularly in criminal justice, is really, really important. So that was my motivation for applying. How about you?
Yeah, so I kind of hinted on some of mine a minute ago when I was talking about kind of the carbon impact of this, because it always feels like when I'm teaching climate change, my students are asking, well, what can I do personally? And I think obviously with travel as it currently is, reducing the amount that we travel is very important, because it is has such high carbon emissions. So that, and a combination of realizing during the pandemic, because in the UK we were pretty heavily locked down for several periods, and I felt my students were really losing out on those international experiences that many of us have been lucky to have during our own education. I was lucky enough to spend a couple of months in China during my undergrad, for example, which was pretty transformative. And my students were kind of stuck in their parents' attics on Zoom, which is nowhere near the kind of experience I was getting. And so when I saw this award kind of being promoted, I thought that sounds perfect, because actually still travel, I guess, is a bit up and down, and we don't quite know what's going to happen. The pandemic isn't finished. So my students are in some cases quite reluctant still to travel, and a lot of people don't have the opportunity to be able to travel. So seeing that and thinking this is actually a really good way for students to get those kind of international experiences, form those relationships, and get those skills that will be so important when they move on from beyond Cardiff, was one of the kind of key drivers for me applying. But just as much is kind of exactly what Staci was just talking about, but on the opposite side. So I teach, my class is called Global Climate Change, and I teach my students about kind of the physical processes. But as part of that, we'll look at how we think different kind of aspects of our climate system are going to change in the future. But naturally, my students will be asking questions about, like, well, why did this happen, and who is responsible? And we can very much talk from the kind of the measurable point of view, saying, well, we have a certain larger amount of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, and this country has emitted this much, and we'll look at how that changes with time and how nations have developed and how they're kind of contributing to this problem. And then my students will say, well, like, who is responsible? Where do we go forward? Who do we blame for this? Who should be fixing this? And that's where I say, well, that's where my expertise ends, because I can just tell you what's happening. I don't know how, like, where we go from there and where we think about responsibilities. So that's why I was so happy to be paired with Staci's class, because I think that's exactly a lot of the things that they're talking about and the questions that my students have. So I'm looking forward to learning from you personally and your students, but also the experience that will give my students and help them to think about this topic, which really is so interdisciplinary. We can't deal with the climate crisis just kind of siloed in our own subject areas. And I think, yeah, especially for UK students too, because we have to choose what we want to do so much earlier than in the US system. So, like, very rarely will we have the equivalent of majors or minors. You just choose a subject at the age of often 18, and that's what you study for the next 3 or 4 years. And even within that, my students, they've chosen geography and they've chosen physical, environmental, or marine geography to be working with me. So it's already very, very specific, and actually they want to think beyond that because they are aiming to be global citizens, and this will give them a really good chance to think more about that. Yeah, so maybe I should hand back over to you.
So with the wonderful help of John and Veronica at ACE and some of the wonderful guest stars from the COIL world that they had us interact with, we entered the planning process last spring to make this happen. And as we sort of went through the developing learning outcomes for our students and really getting into the nitty-gritty, we realized how sort of unique this really is, because our disciplines are pretty far from each other as we got into it. And also the systems are really different in terms of, like you were saying, your students are already really on a track. They're super hyper focused on what they've chosen. And then in undergraduate here in the US, and many of the students that I have in my COIL class that will be going forward have come from a lot of different majors, and some are there, you know, just sort of experimentally. Others are absolutely sure they want to be a wildlife ranger in the future, and so this was like the perfect fit for them. And so it's a really sort of different kind of space in coming together. And so what we've really learned with through the training is how to maintain this sort of integrity of the class that we have locally in our college and what it needs to do while paralleling or joining these classes in these other ways. And I've been really lucky to have such a great partner. Sammie and I just seem to really have similar levels of like how organized we want to be and like how much we want to talk about things, you know, and we're planners, both of us. So it just made it really great to sort of sort through some of those details. So to talk a little bit about what we plan to do, and, you know, we haven't done it yet. We start on October 20th. That's the true kickoff of our joint work with our students. So a lot of what we're going to share with you is, this beautiful ideal version of what we hope to accomplish. We'll check back in with you later about what worked and what didn't work. But what we're trying to do is have them interact, the two classes interact for approximately 7 weeks or so. And we've divided our learning into 3 units over that time. The first 2 being smaller, and then the third one being really project-based cumulative projects. So I'll talk about the first 2 pieces, and then I'll turn it back over to Sammie. But our first thing in COIL best practices, as those of you know who do COIL, is the icebreaker. You want to do something that helps students just talk to each other. Originally I had learned in my pedagogical training, icebreakers are sort of, a kind of a whatever thing. You say what your favorite sport is or your hobby or something. But actually what I learned through the training is that you can actually have the content in the icebreaker. It seems so obvious, and I never thought of it. It's like, oh wait, we can have a climate change icebreaker. Revelation. And so Andre, who is the Cardiff instructional designer on our team, had worked with another group, and they had done a carbon footprint icebreaker for theirs in some other contexts. And so he was like, why don't you try that? Because there's carbon footprint calculators online. And he sent us over some links. So what we're doing with the students when they're first meeting, we're going to have a synchronous Zoom with everyone in the classes, and team members. Karen will be on as well. Andre, we're hoping will be on. So all the units are welcome to join, just the whole team. And what will happen is the students will have already gone through the carbon calculator to figure out what their footprint is, how it's measured, and based on questions about sort of their daily life, how much they drive versus walk or bike. And it even goes into some carbon related to food consumption, so how much meat they eat and so on. And so they'll have that, and we're going to do some reflective exercises with them. They'll introduce themselves to each other and just sort of reflect on something they learned from the exercise. It's a little bit sensitive because we want to make sure we have a feeling that the American side will just have a higher footprint based on infrastructural and lifestyle cultural factors, particularly in Virginia, where we're very car focused here in these parts of Virginia anyway. And so we imagine that the American students will have a higher one. So we're going to, definitely work and have a little bit of a conversation about sort of the things you can and cannot control, making small changes if it interests you. And so that will be the icebreaker, will be that conversation. And so they'll also introduce themselves and what their majors, although your students will all have sort of the same, but something about what interested them about the climate footprint and sort of what perspective they're coming from when they take a look at that. So that's our icebreaker. And then after that, we move to our second assignment, which is grouped with it. So each of the classes, so the Shenandoah and the Cardiff classes, will work amongst themselves for a minute to develop a slide presentation of what they think the foundational knowledge on climate change is from their discipline. And then they're going to present to each other. So they're going to teach each other, and that will also be a synchronous Zoom meeting. And so the idea there is for the students to develop, since they're coming from different disciplinary spaces, we're hoping that the goal is to have some sort of joint vocabulary, that they're able to talk to each other in a way that is helpful, even if they're using different terms. And that could also just be British and Americanisms too. We'll have a chance to work, just to work some of those, divided by a common language kinds of stuff that comes up, and just to sort of have them work there. And then we get to the real shining star, the real depth of it. That's what we're really going to focus on, and what I think will be the key experience. And that is our third module, which will take up 4 or 5 weeks of this. So I'll turn it to you.
So our kind of final shared assignment for the students will be podcasts, which we hope to be able to make available beyond the COIL, because I think we're both going to learn some things actually from what our students produce from those. But this is something that I've used as an assignment before in my class before it became a COIL class, and it's something that the students really got a lot out of. I was a bit nervous about including it because it's kind of different from traditional essays or exams, and I've been so impressed how much my students have got into it. We've had groups like composing their own music for the theme tunes for the podcast, and like way beyond any expectations I had. So I'm excited to see how that develops by doing it virtually, because it seemed like something that we could really easily get our students to collaborate on, that it shouldn't matter if they're together or over Zoom, because they can both contribute to that. So the way that we have decided to do this, because traditionally I've asked students to make podcasts about a different physical aspect of climate change, so we've changed that around a little to incorporate Staci's students by making it place-based. So we've picked some locations that we think are particularly important for various reasons within the climate crisis, and then the students will my students will be able to talk about the physical aspects of climate change there, and Staci will then be able to talk more about the social aspects. So as I said, we hope that we'll be able to release those to all of you, and that will kind of be our final assignment where they work together, and our classes then kind of separate off and do their own thing as they would have done before the COIL. So yeah, look out for these, and we'll definitely be sharing them with everyone, and I'm very excited to hear about them. So I think the final thing we wanted to talk about today, because we want to make sure there's plenty of time for discussion. We've written down positives and negatives, but I think negative is definitely the wrong word, because this has just been an overwhelmingly positive experience. So I'll say positives and challenges. So maybe I'll hand over to Staci to talk about yours to start with, and then I'll finish up.
I think what a lot of the strengths of this has been is the amount of planning that we had the luxury of having, a really long lead time to really work through all of this, sort of putting these two things together. And it's just it's just really good overall for faculty pedagogical development. I mean, it's been professional development as much as it's been all the other great things that this brings. And so I've really learned a lot of techniques that I can use in other classes and other contexts. So that's been a real positive. The students are really excited in the class that I'm already, my class is already ongoing. And I think they feel, it seems like at least a few of them feel like, wow, I really, walked into a class that's doing something really unique. And I think they are really excited about what they know. I haven't told them a whole lot because I didn't want to scare people out of the class by giving them too much information about what we were doing. But I did sort of already, prime them on sort of the basic framework, and students are really, really excited. And we do have a student that's been to Wales before. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
So she was like, oh, great. Yeah, it was such a beautiful place. And, I get to meet new people from there. So it's just a really wonderful thing there. I think, there's always a little bit of nervousness and anxiety going into anything, big that you're trying for the first time. And I think some of what I worry about is, when they're doing the podcast piece, we're really relying on the students. They're going to be in mixed small groups, right? And they're going to have the initiative to work together over Zoom or whatever platforms they choose on their own. It won't be arranged by the class at that point. And so that's sort of that moment of, are people feeling like they can do that? Are they able to sort of stand on their own feet and make those arrangements and actually work on a project, remotely or, online, which, it's just hard because I think as instructors, when I do big things, I tend to have more control. I've been reflecting on control with this, when you have like a face-to-face activity and you're in the room and it's all happening in the classroom, like you can do things to make sure it goes your way. I don't mean it that way, but you know what I'm saying, that it doesn't fall apart and something good comes out of it. And so I'm just sort of working with, hey, there's going to be some things that come up. Maybe a group will have difficulty gelling or whatever, there'll be things that happen. And so just, having that headspace of flexibility is a real a great thing for me, but also a little bit anxiety. And I think the students will be feeling the same way, right? So that's sort of what I've also been reflecting on is my anxiety could also be, a little bit of what a student might face, like, oh, I really have to do this thing with this person that I really only know online, like that also for the student. So I feel like I'm a little bit tapped into maybe how they might feel too. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I think on my side, the positives have definitely been the partnership. Like, I don't know, John and Veronica, what magic you work when you set people up. John mentioned the kind of weird blind date situation almost, but like we were just absolutely fine. We got put in a Zoom room together to chat about some specific questions, and we got to about a minute left of our time and realized we haven't even touched on the questions because we've just been talking about everything we're excited about the partnership. So that's been great. Obviously, Shenandoah have been wonderful in supporting that. I think most of my kind of, I guess, concerns or things I'm anxious about are exactly what Staci mentioned, but also kind of doing this from the aspect of coming from an institution that I'm fairly new to, and I joined Cardiff during the pandemic, so it's taking a lot longer to work out how Cardiff actually functions than it possibly would normally. But also an institution where there isn't a lot of COIL going on as there is in Shenandoah. I think we've really benefited from, on your sides, you absolutely know what you're doing. You're like, oh, COIL, this is how it works, and had such great support in that. Whereas on my end, people are very, very enthusiastic about it, and everyone I talk to about it sounds like, oh, this is a wonderful scheme, and they want to talk about it. Sorry, I've just done an American English thing. Okay. We use the word scheme, and apparently that sounds a bit nefarious over here, so I should call it an award, which sounds weird to me because that seems like way too much, but we've not done it yet. I shouldn't have an award. So that's just one of the small language differences we've noticed. Yeah, so I've sidetracked myself there. When I talk to people about it, they're very enthusiastic, but exactly kind of where it fits into different people's kind of job descriptions and who should be like helping out with this it's taken a bit more kind of thinking about and working out who should be involved. It's a challenge, but a good one, because it's one where I've got to know my institution a little better, and hopefully I'm pulling some people in the institution in a direction where they wouldn't necessarily have gone before, because I think this kind of work and partnerships is really the way forward for a lot of our teaching. There's so many opportunities in there for our students that I'm glad, even if it's kind of been a tricky start, that hopefully lots more things will follow from that. And I'm really looking forward to welcoming Staci and Karen to Cardiff, and I've set up lots of meetings with people who I want to do future COILs, so you're going to be my proponents of how we can do this further in the future. Is there anything else you wanted to add? I think that's all of our points.
That's a wonderful sort of conclusion.
Wow,
So,
maybe we could get a round of applause. That sounds like to hear that. And I was just really impressed with your dynamic. You're like completing each other's sentences. And also the interdisciplinary nature is really remarkable of criminal justice, and also the idea of actually measuring the glaciers melt away. So that's really become apparent to me. So I'd like to turn it over to my colleague now, Karen, who will make some comments and then facilitate the in-person discussion. I'll also monitor the chat.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Karen Lucas, and here at Shenandoah University, I'm the Director of Transformative Teaching and Learning. And I feel compelled to start with a story. In February, I was in Captiva Island, Florida, with my mother and my sister. And if you're familiar with the United States, or if you like shells, Captiva Island is one of the most famous places in the world for finding seashells. And I was walking along the beach. I had my phone, and I saw an unknown phone call pop up. And I usually don't answer the phone when I don't know who's calling, but for whatever reason I did. And I'm so eternally grateful I did, because it was Staci on the other side saying, hi, you don't really know me that well, but would you like to do this project with me? And I said, you had me at project. So I've been so excited in all these months since to be able to work with both Staci and Sammie and Andre on this project. And then, and considering what's just happened to Captiva and Sanibel with the hurricane recently in the United States, Captiva is decimated. Nobody can get there or get off that island. So it feels very apropos to be here today talking about that, when that's how my journey with this COIL started. And the other thing I'd like to say is I tend to talk about my work with the people in my personal life a lot. So my book group, my neighbors, my family. And when I say that I'm involved in this COIL project, this Fulbright, usually what people say to me is, I have so many questions, a glaciologist and a criminal justice professor. How is this happening? So I'm sure all of you have questions as well. So I'd like to open up the floor to see what questions you might have for Staci or Sammie.
And maybe I could invite Veronica Honorably to make the first question because Veronica has been our key contact with ACE along with John. So I know you had to join a little late, but we welcome you here, and maybe you can make some comments and ask a question to Sammie and Staci.
Sure. Well, thank you all, and thank you for inviting us into this room to hear them speak. It's so wonderful to hear Staci and Sammie as they know themselves as being instructors, and I never really thought of myself as an instructor in some ways until recently. But when I listen to them, I'm like applauding because I don't really have to say much in the veins of the things that we taught, the foundations. They already had the basics, and one of the most important elements that I really want to commend them on is being open to reflecting on their own work behavior and practices, and being open to imagining new ways of approaching their work, right? That is like a key ingredient that makes our jobs and our work that we're doing in professional development so much easier. Is that openness is really foundational and something that we really can't force people to have, right? It's a part of who they are. This is so much about collaboration. As you can see, this is at the heart of this work. So I think what they're doing right now is so much going to emulate in the classroom to their students. You know, they're doing this modeling of how to not just think about the issues at hand, the challenges, but also just the sheer nature of sharing perspectives, learning how to articulate thoughts to different audiences, right? Across different disciplines and cultures, and really making this really enriched experience to be broader, the more in the lines of thinking about how these skill sets that they then practice in these experiences can be, you know, applied in the workforce or more broadly in their own personal development. So we're thrilled to be able to work with both Cardiff and Shenandoah. We've kind of been trolling Shenandoah, to be honest, because you're not that far away from us here in Washington, D.C., but we've been trolling the work of Eunice and the work in general that's happening in your campus in this space, because we do see this as a really a new emerging market in higher education, and Shenandoah kind of being at the forefront really fast in supporting faculty to really explore this space and experiment. So that's really commendable. Cardiff, we have just started to get to know, but we are excited to have Sammie as our ambassador for this new work. And we hope that she can work with her colleagues in Cardiff and work with other faculty to have them be as open to engaging in these new methodologies. We certainly see this as the way forward for how campuses work together and have more equitable partnerships with institutions and not be so individualistic in focus. So for that reason, we think that COIL is in a good position, particularly in this time frame right now with advancing not just international programs, but enhancing online learning and pedagogy. So yeah, this is to me really exciting. If I had to ask them a question, I know it's hard because they're just starting to actually go into the implementation phases, so there's a lot of unknowns. But I can only say that, you know, if they could reflect on themselves a little bit of where they were. I think I may have missed this part of the conversation if it was already discussed, so apologies. But when they first heard about virtual exchange and COIL, what their initial knowledge was of it, or what were their reactions to it versus where they are right now? I'm curious.
So I started with Eunice's, and Karin was also an instructor of the Shenandoah COIL last fall semester. And when that was the first time I'd ever heard of it. And I was really excited because the pandemic, I do a lot of international travel related to my research. I wasn't going anywhere and, staying home like everybody else. And I thought, oh, this is a great way for me to do some international work with students, locally and internationally without having to travel. I really thought I was going to be paired with other criminal justice people. Like, I was shocked to find out that most of the COILs actually, the classes don't match, in the obvious ways. And even the level of the students can be different. And I was just like, I don't understand. Like, tell me more, but what? And now having done all the training locally and with ACE, I'm actually on the opposite side where I'm like, the more different, the better, which was really unexpected. But I think that's the richness for the students, that interdisciplinary piece, because really, I think the world and the problems that we're facing, the challenges are so interconnected that we're, even at the undergraduate level, students need to be able to think outside of whatever boxes they've already been in, and just keep going to new perspectives to sort of be, the future professionals and the future leaders. So, that was my sort of transformation.
Yeah, I think I was always thinking along the same lines of what you said about the more different, the better is definitely not where I was, I guess, this time last year or slightly later into last year when the award was first kind of being advertised. I kind of saw the emails and thought, oh, this looked cool, but I was new faculty, so it's like, absolutely cannot apply for that, do not have time. And then saw a second email, I was like, no, this looks so good, I have to really go for it. But even writing the application, I was very much kind of focused on the practical aspects, like how is this going to work at Cardiff? Will my students want to get involved? What if I get paired with someone who's not a physical scientist? Like how on earth will that class work? And now we've kind of gone through the process and we've thought about ways to match up our class. Like, there is so much that I think Staci's students are going to bring to the table in terms of my students' understanding, and vice versa, that I am just really excited for the whole thing. I think are obviously still concerns about practical aspects, because there always is when it's something new. As much as we have planned this, and I think it would all be absolutely fine, you just never know when you're doing virtual things, if someone's Zoom just decides not to work and all those sort of things that we're just going to have to deal with as it happens. Actually, those things don't matter, and it's kind of those like long-term relationships that we're getting through this, and the actual kind of really different nature of the two classes that I think is the real positive.
I think you both talk in your response about students and, having different kinds of students in different places. What are your plans for finding out what students think about this project and this experience? What are your plans for that?
I'll let you talk about that one.
So we were approached by a PhD doctoral candidate at University of Notre Dame, Maryland, who's doing a study on COIL, and asked if she could have a survey that's given to our students before and after about their experience. And so we said yes. And the questions are really great stuff that we also want to know. And she's going to just feed us the data. So it's like, wow. So we will have that formal piece. But I imagine, and note to selves, that sort of after the first session, we'll probably do an informal check-in. I know on my side, I'll do some in-class activities away from your students, just sort of reflecting and hearing sort of what is working and what's not working throughout the process as an informal. And then, we'll also be meeting occasionally when, we'll have a lot going on, but just sort of check in and be like, how are your students? Here's what mine are saying, like if we need to course correct. So I've definitely sort of planned that into this, is that communication. And Okay. Did you have
I think, it was really nice when we got approached about that survey, because we had kind of thought we should have something measurable that we can ask the students at the end, and that came to us. That was great. That's one last thing on the to-do list. But I think as well as that, we have said at every point through the process, like, we're going to have to be flexible. Everything we plan, it may not work. The students may not do what we expect. They may go down a completely different path. So I think we are prepared that we will have to kind of keep checking in, see how they're getting on, and change that as we go. Because we've never done anything. Well, you've done things kind of like this, but not the same. I've never done anything like this, and my students definitely haven't. So yeah, we're prepared for what may or may not happen.
Yeah, great. So we have two questions in the chat. Maria has to leave soon, but she's asking, which is based on how your perspectives have changed in working together over these past months. What kind of attitudinal learnings do you hope your students will make during the course? What will be the impact on their thinking? So
that's a really deep question.
Yeah.
I think what I'm hoping is that the students learn sort of this general skill of being able to collaborate on a project online with something that's really, big and important, not a light thing. Climate change and podcast, and these are challenging things to work on, and they're going to have to do it in this virtual space. I think it's just the way that life is going in the workplace. My husband's in the private sector, and he has a team, and they're all over the world, and they have to get on Zoom and make things happen. And so just that broad skill of having that experience, I think, regardless of where they had it, is really, really important. But again, for my criminal justice students, I'm really hoping that they can kind of work with sort of what are the normal responses if we do, find that we have a responsible party that we, would want to, an oil and gas industry, or somebody that we would want to maybe respond to in the formal criminal justice system, that we recognize that maybe some of the go-tos, like prosecuting and fining, don't actually solve the problem of what's going on the ground with the client. So for my students, I want them to see in a little bit more in the vein of restorative justice, which basically says, look, there's a harm here, and that's what we need to focus on. And so it's better that our criminal justice system is ready to respond to the people's needs on the ground, whether that's for safety or coordination of needs, rather than think of it in terms of who am I going to arrest. So that's sort of the learning on that I would like to have in terms of the content. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think definitely on mine, so you already touched on it, Stacey, the kind of aspect of kind of how do we have a Zoom meeting across continents and get work done is going to be such an important skill for the students going forward, that I'm excited for them to kind of explore that in a safer environment, where if things do go wrong, then they have support there to pick it up, and it's not going to impact their career if they then do this for the first time in the workplace. But I think specifically for my students, because many of them come from quite scientific backgrounds, and even if they don't, they've chosen kind of the physical side of the geography discipline. When we talk about climate change, they can often do think about it kind of, I guess, in numbers and facts, which is what we train them to do, and that's absolutely kind of correct for the discipline. But then when we do start to think about questions about responsibility, they often still are thinking in that kind of very black and white way of, well, this country has emitted X amounts of gigatons of carbon, so they should be responsible for this. And of course, it's not that straightforward, because that's not how humans work. It's not how politics work. So I think for them to kind of take a step back from the numbers and actually think more about kind of relationships and practical ways that we can solve this problem moving forward, I think would be a really great opportunity for that.
Okay, great. And one more question, and then we can maybe see if anyone here would like to add. Amelia is asking, I wonder what technology students will use to communicate in groups and to share information slides with both groups. And if Amy or Marco, Edward, if you have any questions, you could ask those now, and then we could answer any questions together. So.
Yeah, I was kind of curious. In terms of student involvement during the planning process, was there any, and what did that look like?
Oh, that's really interesting. Should we answer the tech question?
Yeah, you can answer both.
We'll do both. So in the COIL I did last fall, it was with a class in Jordan, an entrepreneurship class. And they ended up using WhatsApp a lot, which is really prevalent in Europe and the Middle East. And so I think they did a lot using that particular app. You've done some work with the podcast. Like what do they tend to use to actually build the podcast?
It really varied between student groups. Actually, I was thinking I was going to have to give them a lot of support on the technical side, but I mean, this is a generation that have had some of their formative years during a pandemic. So actually, I never really had to help my students. They're just setting up kind of their own Google Docs, WhatsApp groups, popular, even kind of using social media, Facebook, those kind of things. In terms of the actual teaching, we're going to be using Zoom for the kind of synchronous sessions. And Karen has also been very helpful in setting us up with Google Classroom to have a space that both sets of students can access easily, because Shenandoah and Cardiff are on different learning management systems, and they're all things that are so kind of integrated into our own institutions, but maybe not that well built for integrating with other institutions. So having that kind of shared space centrally for them to do that work is going to be really important, I think.
Yeah, and so you were asking about student involvement in the planning.
Yeah.
That is a really good question. I don't think that was formally the case, but I think informally, because I had done the COIL a year ago with the Jordanians, I was really talking, and it was a small class, so I was talking one-on-one with students, like how it's going and what's working, what's not working. So I feel like I did have a little bit of a read of what was great about it and what was confusing, and from that experience. But everyone is so unique, and so I learned from that, but it's sort of an open question as to whether the learning from that one necessarily applies to this one. But yeah, I think that would be my answer.
Yeah, it's not something we've done formally, but certainly it's something I've been talking with my students a lot about informally. I was quite lucky that my version of this class before the COIL was running during the spring semester as we were doing the training. So I was definitely talking to my students kind of offline about like, oh, next year this might be happening. What do you think would be an exciting thing to do then? How do you think this would work? So sort of getting that feedback informally, but maybe that's, for future COILs would be nice to get students involved. I mean, most of mine were kind of confused about how the whole thing worked because it's so new to us as an institution. But yeah, I hope that in the future, as this becomes more prevalent, that's something we can actually get students on board with much more.
Yeah, and I do want to mention that in the one that I did, I had a couple students who'd already done one in another class. So they were actually like little is the right word, they were, helping out, sort of socialize, if you will, everybody else in sort of what was going on. And so when I found out they had done one of yours, Eunice, and I said, okay, so how was that experience? Right up from the bat, when they like, oh, we've done this before with Dr. Mirza. And I was like, oh, tell the class about, what you did and what it felt like, and, what was great about it, and what, and so that was really cool. So that's a way also of sort of tapping into the experience. And so I think that we have one student in my class who's done a COIL-like thing, but with another American class. Dr. Degrassi has done a similar model, just domestically, which I call a coddle. I don't know if you need that acronym in your world of
trademark that.
Eunice and I have, I think a while ago, we discussed that when this does get a little bit more developed, that we could perhaps create like a mentorship system like we have with FYS. So we could have student mentors who are part of COIL. And, but we have to build that a little bit more, but I think we're getting there where we have some students who have some experience in tapping into that, just with the general knowledge of, some things with the cultural parts that could be helpful. So I think we actually were close to that. So we will definitely be tapping into some of your students.
Great. So I think we've reached time, but I want to thank everyone for joining. Amy, do you want to say any final thoughts?
No, I'm so impressed. I'm so excited to see the implementation. So, we've done so much prep work, and the implementation takes a while. So we learn with every implementation. So I'm excited to really see how this pans out, and sometimes we learn more from our mistakes and from our successes. So even if, things don't go entirely smoothly, which we know won't, but with every diversion we learned so much. So we're going to learn so much from you too, and I'm feel really grateful that we have this award and that this is part of our environment now.
Absolutely, and I hopefully we can organize another forum after you're done, and maybe even showcase some of the podcasts.
Yes, that would be
produced.
Cool.
That would be amazing. So with that, maybe we can give another round of applause.
Thank you.